Welcome to the Pivot Point podcast. This season, I'm focused on sharing stories and ideas from experts on diversity and inclusion. In this episode, I will share some insights and ideas from my guest, Bernadette Smith. Together, we will leave you with some actionable tips to think about and discuss with your organization. We share this information because inclusive leadership is a journey. It requires bravery and courage, and you do not have to do it alone. At Pivot Point, I believe we are stronger together. We are one. So we're going to dig into this week's guest. I'm going to tell you all about Bernadette to start. And we're going to hear from her on her D&I journey and how she got into this work and the things she's hearing from successful clients in the diversity and inclusion space. So meet Bernadette Smith. She has been an in-demand keynote speaker, thought leader, and consultant for years. Her candid and practical yet humorous approach has made her popular with diverse business audiences around North America. Simply put, she cuts through the bull, yet her timely messages of gender boundaries, anti-harassment, and diversity and inclusion can be directly tied to a company's improved bottom line. Bernadette has presented to enthusiastic audiences of CEOs, associations, entrepreneurs, leadership teams, sales professionals, account executives, marketing executives, and human resources managers, and more. She is CEO of the Equality Institute, whose mission is to help organizations win bigger by treating workers and clients with dignity and respect. She holds a BS and MBA, and her expertise has been sought after by the Today Show, the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, and the National Public Radio, amongst others. Bernadette is an award-winning author of 3 books. Her 4th book, I'm assuming Assumptions, will be released later next year. So welcome, Bernadette.
Hi, Julie. Thank you so much for having me. And I am so sorry that you got stuck with like a 5-paragraph bio. I should have given you a shortened version.
I was very enthusiastically reading it.
You
I felt the
were.
emotion there. Well, tell
Absolutely
us
were.
how, with all your great credentials, and I know the kind of clients you're working with and spreading this great message out in the community, how the heck did you get into this work? How did you get started?
My story started back in 2004 when I was living in Boston. At the time, the state ruled in favor of marriage equality for same-sex couples. So I was young and gay and had a girlfriend and very enthusiastic supporter of same-sex marriage. But there were all of these protests at the State House trying to ban same-sex marriage before the law went into effect. So I would take long lunches and go to the State House, and I would look around and see all of these couples fighting for their rights, and some of them had been together for decades. And I just knew that there was a great opportunity to support them in planning their weddings by being an advocate, by helping them be free from discrimination as they plan their weddings. So I decided, hey, I'm going to be a gay wedding planner. I've been doing event planning for nonprofits. So I started this business, and it was really based on kind of being an activist wedding planner, being an advocacy-based wedding planner. And things were great. Then a few years later, around the advent of Twitter, I started connecting with people in the wedding and travel industries and hospitality industries from around the world, all because of social media. And they're asking me things like, so what's a gay wedding, or what's the difference? And I ended up writing 3 books on the subject, put together a curriculum, and started training wedding and hospitality and travel professionals all around the world, all about LGBTQ weddings, LGBT equality and marketing and all of that great stuff. And sort of the rest is history. My career has
Wow.
evolved. It's evolved from there, beyond LGBTQ and beyond the wedding industry.
That's such a great story, Bernadette. I mean, it's really an entrepreneurial spirit that you saw a need, you were passionate about it, and people were asking you questions that you had answers to. You had solutions.
Yeah, exactly. It was really fun. It was fun to sort of build an industry and be part of something that is emerging and actually still is in most of the world. There's still a huge need for understanding about LGBT weddings and equality. But eventually I eventually retired from planning weddings, and my focus has been really exclusively focused on diversity and inclusion more broadly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's how we got to know each other as, people in the similar spaces sharing ideas, and we've collaborated in a number of ways. So I'm curious, Bernadette, I know your specific niche within DNI. I lead with gender, although obviously, there's so much intersectionality in that experience, as I know there is as well with the LGBTQ community. And that's something that you're very, that's where you got your roots and got your
Mhm.
start. But as you're entering other spaces with diversity and inclusion, I'm curious, how do you see LGBTQ fitting in? Where are we now with that dimension of diversity? And how do you see it tying to overall inclusion?
Well, I think on a social level, most Americans are pretty open and accepting of LGBTQ folks because more and more LGBTQ folks are out. So most
Mhm.
people know someone who happens to be gay or trans or whatever. And so it's becoming more accepting socially. Not not It's not a perfect situation by any means, but it's definitely getting better. Certainly towards marriage equality, when I started, there were only a third of Americans who supported it, and now most of the country does.
Mhm.
But beyond that, the problem is that the laws haven't kept up. So we same-sex couples can get legally married in every state, but in about 28 states, you can still be fired for being LGBT or Q or assumed to be, or you can be denied access to basic things like housing or using a restaurant. Like you can literally be kicked out of a restaurant because someone thinks you're gay in Texas and
Hmm.
it's not against the law.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So that's sort of the difference, is that those laws are not federally enshrined, those protections are not. And so corporate America has really been asked to step up, and they have done a fantastic job of filling in that gap and
Mhm.
making sure that their LGBTQ employees are protected, at least in their workplace. At least the policies are in place in many Fortune 500 companies.
Yeah. Yeah, that's remarkable. I mean, I think we can learn a lot from the LGBTQ journey of engaging allies. Straight allies were engaged in
Hmm.
marriage equality and foundationally connecting on a shared value with the straight community.
Hmm.
And then to your point about once you know somebody that's affected by this, it's really hard, not to be accepting of it when it's someone in your family or your friend, or you see the experiences that they have about not being welcomed in public spaces, like you talked about. Being
Right.
it's okay to discriminate still.
Hmm.
And so once you have a window into that world, it's really hard to unsee that. And so I think that's such a lesson learned for all the other diversity dimensions, whether it's race or gender. I mean, the advancement just of acceptance around marriage equality in 20 years' time is just unparalleled from
Hmm.
any other social change. And so I'm curious, Bernadette, what do you think some of the key success factors were in that rapid social acceptance, and what can we learn from that for overall DNI?
That's a great question. So I think that the rapid social acceptance, again, it sort of had to do with people coming out and people knowing someone whose child or niece or nephew or whomever, grandkid, um, got engaged to or got married to a same-sex partner. Again, it just sort of comes from that familiarity and knowing that the sky didn't fall, right? And knowing that it's okay, like the everything ends up okay and love is love. And so that certainly helped. I think having seen more celebrities come out and get married has certainly helped. People like Neil Patrick Harris is
Mhm.
very beloved, Ellen. So I think Ellen has really helped a lot because everyone loves Ellen, right? Um, so I think that has definitely helped some. I think that seeing some marketing that is LGBTQ inclusive and seeing us represented in images and in TV ads like Zales, for example, Zales Jewelers had
Mhm.
a TV ad with a lesbian wedding in it. I think it was last year. So examples like that certainly help. It just kind of normalizes it.
Mhm.
So all of those things combined have really led to that level of acceptance. As far as what the other elements of D&I can learn, I mean, I would say that there are a few things. One is it's really critically important to just be yourself, to be authentic, because when you are and like when I, coming out, being authentic as a LGBTQ person, it allows people to get to know us and allows us to create psychological safety in others. And we know how important that is to create an inclusive workplace. So, that sort of lesson is really important. I would say, in terms of marketing, showing if you're trying to attract diverse customers and clients, then you should show images with diverse customers and clients in
Yep.
your marketing. Like, put out to the universe what you want to attract back. Um, so there's that piece as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so important that you see yourself reflected inside an organization as an employee or as a customer. People will tell me, I can't find images like that, or I can't find talent like that.
Hmm.
I can personally say I used to say that and I was wrong. I just got a bank of new stock images that are extremely diverse. I have 600
Hmm.
images now. So,
Yes.
but I had to ask, I had to do some digging, and that's the part that I think for people that fall into the majority group, it feels harder. Like, I have to do things different. I have to change. Why can't
Hmm.
everyone else just change for me?
Right.
And that's not the way it works with diversity and inclusion. And you kind of have to, like you said, be authentic, look yourself in the mirror first. So
Hmm.
I'm curious, Bernadette. I know you're passionate about, talking to leaders, and you mentioned frontline employees, especially in the hospitality space where you got your start. I'm curious, for thinking about, I always say lead from where you're at. You don't have to be a leader or manager to set the tone for diversity and inclusion at your company. You don't have to be the D&I officer or the HR person or, whoever you think is in charge of this. Everyone is. I'm curious in the trainings that you do and education you do with frontline employees, what do you focus on? What are some of the, subtle but really impactful acts that people can take that are in the trenches in organizations, to really be inclusive and be an ally?
Sure. So when I'm working with frontline employees, I generally don't get a lot of time, right? Because frontline employees are folks who are often on the floor or they're in the field. They might be doing sales. They might be doing customer service. There might be working retail or restaurants, although I haven't worked with those types of clients. They might be at the airport working with guests. So they're really not getting a lot of time to learn these principles of being an inclusive customer service associate. So what I try to do, given those constraints, is try to, as I do a lot of train the trainers with managers. So one of the things that I focus on is how do we build little principles of inclusion into the daily stand-up meetings, or into the morning huddle, or into the weekly sales call, or the biannual sales meeting. How can we have those conversations in a really short, simple way when you're having other sort of conversations? And so that's sort of, we focus on that kind of timing. And then we also focus on the core values and the key training principles of that particular organization. So if their core values are collaboration and connection and diversity, well, how can they be really collaborative with each other if they are um, not standing up or not speaking out if they witness racism? Or how can they be really connected with their customer if they are making assumptions about that client or that customer? So really, instead of asking good questions, so we build inclusion as part of like layers of their existing core concepts, and we
Mhm.
do it in short bursts during their existing meetings.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think you got to meet people where they're at. Probably the number one challenge I face with inclusive leadership training or any inclusion training or education, because that's where the conversation has to start. People have to be aware and have tools, is we don't have the time for that, right?
Right.
We're
Yeah, exactly.
lucky to get like an hour for the year. It's just
Mhm.
puzzling to me. Like you said, it was important, though. I don't understand. And so, how do you package tools in a way that are in existing team meetings, existing discussions, managers are equipped to talk about this with their employees? Because the liability is huge, right? I mean, you think about something like what happened at Starbucks almost a couple years ago. We
Mhm.
still are talking about that and remember, someone doing something that was fairly perceived to be very racist, and they had to shut
Mhm.
down all of their stores and do a half-day unconscious bias training. So, I don't like to lead with that with organizations that aren't making the time for training, but hey, if you don't do something, things could get hairy. So with
Mhm.
that in mind, Bernadette, I know both of us like to focus on the positives, right? And there are some great things that are happening out there in the diversity and inclusion space. There's some companies that are really setting the tone for what good looks like. So tell me, what companies do you think are getting it right? What examples do you have of things, strategies that some of our listeners could glean and take away and apply at their organization?
Sure. Well, I'm glad you mentioned this, and I'm glad that you're also focused on the positive, Julie, because it really is my kind of passion is to share best practices and good news, because there's lots of bad news out there, but I'd really rather focus on what the world, what the organizations are doing right, instead of wrong. So I actually share on LinkedIn every weekday this little tip, and it's always about 45 seconds, as in it's a video, and it's a little selfie video, and I just talk about something great and positive and optimistic in diversity, equity, inclusion, and corporate social responsibility. So if you want to check those out, you can follow me at hashtag one thing I learned today. But anyway, that aside, it really kind of means that I am always finding really great examples of what's going right. So some things that I love talking about LGBTQ stuff, so I'll use a few examples of that. There are some companies now, including T-Mobile, Starbucks, and Target, that allow their sales associates to include their pronouns on their name badges. So, this is definitely a best practice. It's something that any organization with frontline employees can do. But pronouns, things like he or she or they, are examples of pronouns. My pronouns are she and her.
Mhm.
So, when we share our pronouns with another person, we give them the safe space. We create the safe space for them to share their
Yep.
pronouns with us. So if someone happens to be transgender or non-binary or gender fluid or whatever it happens to be, and they are at risk of being misgendered, or their gender is a little ambiguous, giving them the space to share their pronouns really establishes a lot of safety and trust. And that is priceless with your clients and customers.
Mhm.
And also, it allows your employees to feel like they can be themselves and avoid being misgendered by a customer or a guest. So it sort of goes both ways, and it just generates a lot of positive buzz. Not buzz, that sounds negative, but positivity. It's
Yeah.
just great.
Well, the pronoun thing's so interesting. I remember when it first started surfacing last year, I was like, why would I share my pronouns? I think it's pretty obvious that I'm a she or
Hmm.
her. And then as you said, well, it's not about me, number one. Number
Hmm.
two, it's giving permission and psychological safety for others that might be misgendered, right? So if I declare it as somebody that might fit into the majority group on my pronouns because I am cisgender, I identify with the same gender as which I was assigned at birth. So it gives people freedom to express theirs. And so I think as allies, this is really a chance to be an ally by simply adding your pronouns to your LinkedIn profile, to your email signature. Just it frees everybody else to be them. And
Hmm.
Bernadette, you and I, when we first connected, gosh, I think it was about a year ago. Um, so much is rapidly changing in this world and in this
Hmm.
space. I remember you really educated me. I really had, the language I was using was really not as inclusive as it could be, quite candidly. And
Hmm.
saying something like two genders, and I was talking about male allies for women. And so I really credit you with helping me see. I remember you saying, so there's more than two genders. Gender
Hmm.
is a spectrum. And since
Right.
then, I mean, it's been an evolution for me, and there's tons of information and content out there to understand that. But I'm curious, I think you did a really nice job of just subtly calling out like, "Hey, it's not that you're wrong or you're biased or you're not
Mhm.
anti, but hey, here's how you can be better." That's a question I get a lot is when somebody says or does something that's not so appropriate or could be better, how do you recommend people call people out on that?
a great question, and it's also something I'm very interested in. And when I'm doing a training, I use something called the ARC method, and ARC stands for Ask, Respect, Connect. And so, really, by following the ARC method, you're confronting someone or calling someone out from a place of curiosity, not from confrontation. So, really, start by asking the question, "What did you mean by that?" Or, "Can you tell me more?" Like, "Can you tell me
Mhm.
more when you said that you're never going to that you're still going to use their dead name? Like, can you tell me more about that?" So just come from a place of curiosity, which can take a minute. Like, you might take a deep breath before you are ready to start this conversation. I acknowledge that. But really, asking someone in a gentle, curious way to explain themselves gets the conversation going. And then R stands for respect. So that means just to listen, to use nonverbal communication, to listen, don't interrupt, and show them the same kind of respect you would like. And
Mhm.
then C stands for connect. So just to sort of paraphrase, to validate them and to move on. Even if you disagree, you can still reconnect. You can still say things like, "You know what? I respect your opinion about that, but please don't say that around me." You can, you can say that. So I teach the ARC method, Ask, Respect, Connect, as a tool to call out bad behavior, to speak up in witnessing harassment, and even to really get clarity in any situation.
Mhm. Oh, that's so good. I love acronyms because they shorten the thought process. A lot of times we're kind of emotionally hijacked when someone says or does something that's, pretty inappropriate. You're like, "Oh boy, I cannot believe they said that or did that," right? So we get defensive, then we give them no choice but then to be defensive. So if you take it from a place of curiosity, and I love just playing back what they said. "Hey, when you said
Hmm.
this, what'd you mean?" And almost
Exactly.
always when you mirror the words back to them, like, "Oh, I didn't mean that." Like, "That is what you said." You know?
Right.
And it's like, "Oh boy, I can do better." And almost always that results in some sort of clarification or the intention suddenly is confirmed. And so people kinda in those moments, those are real teachable moments where people can get better. But we have to create these brave spaces. They are, protecting the psychological safety is important, but it sometimes isn't the safest conversation. I think sometimes there is legitimate confusion. There
Mhm.
might be real angst in those conversations. If you take it from a place of respect, emphasizing curiosity and connection, that's
Mhm.
brilliant. Well,
Yeah,
thank
I think that's true. I think it's also really important to understand that it's even okay to use the ARC method on leaders.
Mhm.
It's not just about peers or subordinates, it can be used on leaders as well. But again, it's really about the right asking the right question and striking the correct tone.
Yep, absolutely. Well, knowing you have a plethora of ideas to share, I'm so thankful we got some great nuggets from you today. I love the conversation about pronouns and the lessons learned from companies that are doing this right. I have to give you a shout out. Your weekly newsletter about the things that you learn each week are very positive. So, for anybody wanting to get educated in the diversity and inclusion space, I could not recommend Bernadette's newsletter more. Do subscribe to that. It's very timely and educational, and I know I learn and share it every week. I learn something new from following you. Um,
Thank you. That's very nice of you to say.
oh,
Uh,
it's absolutely genuine.
I really love making it, and honestly, I don't love marketing, but I don't. I do like doing this because it doesn't feel like marketing.
Well, you're curating content. As hard as we try to stay in the news on these things, that the negative news dominates the positive news, and your stories are very positive, and very applicable to most companies. Can take something and apply it to their organization very easily.
Thank you.
So, with that in mind, if you had to leave our listeners with one key idea, one
Mhm.
strategy that they can take and apply at their organization, what would you say if you had to wave a magic wand and only pick one?
I would say if I had to pick one, it would be unconscious bias training.
Yeah.
I think it's really or like I like to say, unassuming assumptions training because I describe it as assumptions rather than unconscious bias. But anyway, I just think it's the cornerstone of everything else.
Mhm. Yeah.
It really does. It seeps into everything we do. So I think it's just a critical place to start.
Yeah. Yeah, you can see people really, light up in those rooms. There might be some fear and trepidation to start, but people's body language starts to open up, and as they start to see themselves as a part of the solution versus the problem, but addressing your bias and being self-aware, you have to start from a place of self-awareness around this topic first.
Absolutely. That's
Excellent.
exactly right. Thank you.
And we have if you're interested in that topic and Bernadette's take on bias, we have a guest blog on our website at Next Pivot Point. You can check out about reframing that because unconscious bias doesn't always have a positive connotation. It can really scare people. So I know you have a different take on it and how to reframe that and introduce it to your organization if you haven't yet. And I've worked with a lot of organizations that have done the first wave. There is absolutely a 2.0, a deeper dive that you can take with segmented audiences or with, a regroup of alumni from the previous cohort.
Mhm.
So can it doesn't happen. It's not a one and done training. It's an ongoing
Exactly.
effort. Well, awesome,
Exactly.
Bernadette. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Julie. Have a great one.
Oh, and how can our listeners follow you? Actually, would you like
Sure.
to give your social handles and website as well?
Sure. I'm Bernadette Smith on LinkedIn. My website is theequalityinstitute.com. And on Twitter, I'm Bernadette underscore EQ. And please subscribe to my newsletter at theequalityinstitute.com. I think you'll really like it. So thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, I get lots of newsletters and it's definitely one that I always read and I learned something. That is amazing.
Thanks.
Well, awesome. Thanks so much for being with us.
All right. Have a great one. Bye.
Bye. Did you know that you can find all 5 seasons of our 50 plus episodes at nextpivotpoint.com? And you can sign up for a complimentary 7-day preview of our new program, Lead Like an Ally, and order our new book, Lead Like an Ally. I appreciate you listening to this episode. Who do you know that needs to hear this message? Hit the share button and connect with me on LinkedIn. I post daily. Simply search Julie Kratz, Kratz. I host this podcast because I believe we are stronger together. We are one.